Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. A couple weeks ago, my friend Adam Neely released a video called Solving James Brown's Rhythmic Puzzle, where he tried to analyze the way Brown sings the opening line to his 1965 single, I Got You. Wow! I feel good! It's a great video, and I highly recommend watching it, but personally, if I'm being honest, I found Adam's analysis kinda baffling. It seemed at times like he was listening to a completely different clip than I was, or at least hearing it very differently. So what was James Brown actually singing there? Let's find out. This video is sponsored by Hook Theory. Right off the bat, I want to be really clear about something. Adam's analysis is entirely reasonable, and it does a good job explaining how he hears this line. My goal here isn't to convince you that Adam did a bad job, because he didn't. This is a scholarly disagreement among colleagues and friends, and the fact that my analysis is different from Adam's doesn't mean either of us is wrong. It just means we're different people with different backgrounds and different ears. More on that later. With that out of the way though, let's explain the puzzle. Basically, when James Brown sings this, I feel good, which syllables is he emphasizing? Or, in more technical terms, what's the prosody? Prosody comes up a lot when you're talking about poetry, and thus lyrics, and we tend to analyze it by labeling certain syllables as strong while the others are weak. So, where are the strong syllables here? Seriously, that's a real question. Where are they? I'll play the clip again, and I want you to try to figure out which ones you hear as strong. I feel good! Got it? Okay, now write your answer down. You can put it in the comments if you like, but it really helps with these sorts of problems to commit to an interpretation before you get too deep into someone else's. Remember, there are no wrong answers, so just go with your gut. As for me though, I hear some fairly obvious accents on the words feel and good, and I'm pretty sure I can identify exactly where Adam's thought process diverges from my own. It's when he says this.
So when we talk about musical stress, I guess more technically speaking, it's metric stress.
And, those are not the same thing. And this is a huge deal. Adam builds basically his entire argument around the idea that musical stress is traditionally defined by metric position. Within a bar, certain beats are considered strong while others are weak, and our perception of where musical accents lie is defined by their relationship to this underlying metric framework. And yeah, that's true, but it's incomplete. To see how, let's step away from James Brown for a second. In fact, let's step away from funk entirely and look at Green Day's Boulevard of Broken Dreams. I'm gonna play you the first line, and I want you to tell me which note in the melody feels like it has the strongest musical accent. I walk a lonely road. It's the high note, right? I don't know, maybe you hear it differently, but to my ears, that feels incredibly obvious. And yet it's not even on a beat, it's on the 8th note between beats 3 and 4. And there's no syncopation either, at least none that would impact our perception of this note. He's singing the beats on either side, but the emphasis is still drawn to the middle. And you've probably already figured out how. Again, it's the high note. He jumps up to it and then falls back down. I don't think I need to explain how higher notes, especially in vocal parts, tend to create emphasis. But if we go back to I Got You, I feel good, we can see the word feel has the same thing going on. It's not a leap this time, but it's still the melodic peak, and regardless of meter, that draws your attention. But it's not just pitch. You may have noticed that feel is also the longest note in the phrase, and duration is another common way of creating musical accents. When Aretha Franklin sings, there are, in theory, two perfectly reasonable ways to parse that sentence. She could be singing, I thought you were my man, or I thought you were my man. They're both linguistically valid, and since thought falls in a stronger metric position than you does, that should be the accent, right? I mean, no. Obviously not. She holds you for twice as long as every other note, so of course it's going to sound more important. And again, the same thing happens in I Got You. I is an 8th note, feel is a quarter, and good is... well, he trails off at the end, but it's basically a quarter note long. Point is, the last two are longer, so they feel stronger. And that's still just the tip of the iceberg. Things like dynamics and vocal delivery can play a big role too. When Edwin Starr sings, induction, then destruction, who wants to die? The increased volume and percussive delivery on the word die makes it a really clear accent. This one's not hugely relevant to the question at hand, since as Adam demonstrates in his video, Brown sings all three words with roughly the same intensity, but it's such an obvious and important factor in general that I'd be remiss if I didn't at least bring it up. And then there's the lyrics. If you speak a language, you have an intuitive feel for that language's natural flow, and that can guide your perception. When Stevie Wonder sings, 13-month-old baby, most of the syllables are on syncopated 16ths, but even without any metric guidance, we would still know the accents are 13-month-old baby, not 13-month-old baby, because, you know, English. Adam does talk about this, but he divides it out into the separate category of linguistic stress, implying that it's not really a musical concern, and I'd be very hesitant to do that. Expectation is a powerful thing. When we're listening to vocals, we tend to hear accents in places that make lyrical sense, unless there's a good reason not to. Or at least I do. Maybe my background as a vocalist and lyricist is biasing my perception here, but at the end of the day, I can really only speak to how I hear things anyway. In the case of I Got You, this is a little tricky, because pretty much any set of accents could make sense linguistically, but to me this line feels like it's describing how he feels, not who's doing the feeling, so again, feel and good would be more natural accents than I. All these factors and more combine to form our perception of musical accents. If you only consider metric stress, then yeah, you're gonna have a hard time explaining I Got You, but you're also gonna have a hard time explaining Bach's Prelude in C. That's a recording by Elaine Pratt, and there's definitely accents on beats 1 and 3, but I'm also hearing a pretty obvious one on the and of 4, one of the weakest parts of the bar. Basically, I'm hearing this. And I suspect it's not hard to see why. Again, it's a melodic peak, but more than that, these 3 notes are identical to these 3 notes, so it makes sense to play them the same way. The second one is just borrowing the accent from the first. And listening to different versions of this, Pratt is not an outlier. Most pianists seem to accent this note, either by playing it louder, hanging on it for a fraction of a beat longer, doing a little staccato, or even just playing it the same as everything else and letting the melodic structure create the emphasis on its own. In order to not have this accent, you'd have to intentionally bury the note, playing it softer than the rest of the music, and I couldn't find anyone doing that. Now, I don't bring this up to compare I Got You to the Prelude in C, or to imply that funk music is basically the same as Baroque counterpoint. They're very different styles with their own conventions, structures, and vocabularies. You can't necessarily take lessons from one and apply them directly to the other. No, my point isn't that the same rules apply to both these clips, it's that even across such clear stylistic boundaries, the idea that you can measure accents strictly by patterns of normative metric stress just doesn't work. It's insufficient everywhere. You can even see this in Adam's own example. When explaining the concept of metric stress, he demonstrates how your perception of a melody changes when you move it to a new position. Check it out. And I love this. It's a great demo, and my perception of the accents definitely changes, but it doesn't change in quite the way Adam says it's supposed to. On the first statement, we completely agree. I hear it as strong, weak, strong, just like the metric structure would imply. But on the second statement, I hear it as strong, weak, strong, weak. The accent that Adam hears on beat 3, I hear on beat 2 instead. It's the first and highest note in the melody, and for me, that overrules the meter. But coming back to I Got You, I'll be honest, for this specific line in this specific song, it feels weird to me to be talking about metric stress at all, because when James Brown sings, I feel good, he's singing it as a pickup. The groove hasn't started yet. We don't actually know this is beat 3 until after he's finished singing it. Or, to be fair, there is some metric information here. The whole intro is, wow, I feel good. And that scream and drum hits sort of sound like beats 1 and 2, which it turns out they are, so you could reasonably assume the line started on beat 3. But if we go back to Adam's example, we see a clear, strong drum groove with an obvious backbeat, whereas here we just get one stop time hit to line everything else up against. The metric framework just isn't as strong as it will be once the song actually begins, so metrically speaking, I'd argue that all these notes are weak. Any emphasis must be coming from the way he actually sings them. But why does this question matter? Well, the accent pattern of a phrase changes its apparent meaning. Adam demonstrates this pretty well.
So if we stress the I and I feel good, it's answering the question, who here is feeling good? I feel good. Stressing feel can be a rejoinder to the compliment, you look good. I feel good. Stress good, and it can be the answer to the question, how do you feel? I feel good.
But I do have a slight problem with this explanation. Adam presents only 3 interpretations, but for a group of 3 syllables, there's actually 8 possible stress patterns ranging from all weak to all strong. And to be fair, Adam definitely knows this. I assume he made a conscious decision to simplify the set of options in order to avoid an unnecessarily long tangent, and in the context of his argument, I think that's a reasonable decision, but this is 12-tone. Unnecessarily long tangents are like my whole thing. Of these 8 patterns, I think we can immediately rule out the idea that they're all weak, within the implicit rules of the English language that couldn't actually exist as a standalone sentence. I tried to demonstrate this version so you could hear what it might sound like, but I can't even do it. My brain can't process it. I always wind up putting an accent somewhere. On the other side, though, they might all be strong, as in, I feel good. This is Adam's eventual conclusion, but to my ears, it seems pretty unconvincing. Whatever these 3 syllables are, they do not sound equivalent. That leaves the versions where only some of the syllables are strong, and this is where I take a little issue with Adam's explanation. Again, I think it's a fine way to introduce the idea, but by only demonstrating the lines with 1 strong syllable, you risk creating the false impression that we must be looking for a singular point of emphasis. It turns the question from what's the accent pattern in this phrase to which of these syllables is the strongest, and those aren't necessarily the same thing. Sure, there could be 1 strong syllable, but there could also be 2. He could be singing I feel good, or the one I think it actually is, I feel good. Each of these has its own subtle nuances of meaning, and while I understand why they were left out, I think the analysis is incomplete without them. But there's one moment in the video that stands out to me when Adam says this:
I just feel like the words feel and good have more weight to them.
And it kinda sounds like he's unconvinced by his own forthcoming all-strong analysis. Now, this is pure speculation, so Adam, if I'm off base with this, I apologize in advance, but I feel like you may be making a classic music theory mistake here. You may be letting your analysis get in the way of your perception. And look, we've all done this. I certainly have. Remember that time I tried to analyze Hurt in A minor because it didn't occur to me that the drone line might actually be on the dominant? Ridiculous. But for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, one of the most important and least acknowledged aspects of music analysis is that the analytical lens you use fundamentally limits your ability to imagine possibilities. Like, say you heard James Brown sing this: I feel good. You might immediately instinctively feel that the word I isn't all that strong, but if you think of accents primarily in terms of metric stress, it becomes very hard to let go of the idea that it's supposed to be. You wind up talking yourself into hearing things that aren't there just because it's easier to explain if they are. Now, one way to square that circle is to find a more complex version of your model that explains why the basic version is wrong. In this case, you'd need a better description of metric stress that allows for what you're actually hearing, which seems like what he's trying to do with the discussion of syncopation. Adam claims that funk music, along with other genres of Black American music like jazz, rock, and hip-hop, uses syncopation to create accents in positions that don't align with the presumed patterns of metric stress, and yeah, no argument here, that's 100% true. But they don't do it by magic, they do it by emphasizing those notes with other forms of musical stress, especially duration. When Sly Stone sings, he creates an accent on the and of one not just by syncopating, but by holding the syncopated note for longer than the surrounding ones. So yeah, syncopation is an important factor here, but I don't think it's the cause of the accents, it's more like the result of them. Syncopation is emphasizing the offbeats, so when we use these techniques to create emphasis, we also create syncopation. So why make this video? Is it really such a big deal that Adam hears 1 syllable in 1 song differently than I do? Yes. Okay, no, but one thing I think we in Music Theory YouTube often do a really bad job communicating is that all of this is fake. I don't mean it's not useful, but it's just one way of thinking about music. Music theorists aren't uncovering hidden truths about the universe, we're making things up and seeing if we like them. When we do an analysis, we're not presenting facts, we're presenting our perspective, and that perspective will be informed by our backgrounds, our experiences, our preferences, and our training. Adam and I play different instruments in different styles, we went to different schools, listened to different bands, and are just different people. It's not surprising that we disagree sometimes, it'd be more surprising if we didn't. And this happens all the time in music theory, but that rarely comes across in our work. I mean, we try. My videos are littered with caveats like to my ears and the way I hear it, but we never really show those differences in perspective, and that means we're not being clear about how this stuff really works. So I'm not trying to start a fight with Adam. Honestly, I asked his permission to critique his video, and he was enthusiastic about it. Hopefully he still is. But I think it's important to talk about our disagreements, to pull back the curtain and give y'all a peek at how thoroughly made up everything is, so we don't wind up accidentally convincing you that the way you hear music is wrong and bad because it's not how we tell you to hear it. Music theory doesn't work like that. It doesn't have right and wrong answers. It doesn't have answers at all. All it has is ideas. That said, Adam is wrong. I love these sorts of theory debates because they really force you to think about music in all sorts of ways you might not have previously considered. You can't just disagree with someone, you have to explore why you disagree, and that can open up all sorts of new avenues. But articulating those reasons requires a pretty strong music theory background, so if you're not sure where to start with that, you might want to check out Hook Theory. Hook Theory has all sorts of great resources to introduce you to music theory. One of my favorites is their song database, which shows a bunch of common chord changes, and you can even search it to find examples of songs with specific progressions. They also have theory tabs where they transcribe harmonies and melodies into their own clear, easy-to-digest notation. And if you're looking to do some songwriting, they've used all those resources to build HookPad, their songwriting notepad, which uses all that information to make suggestions for how to continue a piece if you get stuck. If you want to try that, they're even offering you a special deal. The first 1,000 12-tone viewers to click the link in the description will get 20% off a bundle that includes not just a lifetime subscription to HookPad, but also both of Hook Theory's interactive books, which are a great guide to the basics of music theory for songwriters. And hey, thanks for watching, thanks to our Patreon patrons for making these videos possible, and extra special thanks to our featured patrons, Susan Jones, Jill Sundgaard, Duck, Howard Levine, Warren Huart, Kevin Wilamowski, and Grant Aldonas. If you want to help out and help us pick the next song we analyze too, there's a link to our Patreon on screen now. Oh, and don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.